The Earth provides humanity with everything that it needs. It is not able, however, to satisfy all of the demands of human greed. These are the words of Mahatma Gandhi, the father of Indian independence. As Gandhi stated, the Earth has always provided us and all other living beings with the water and food that we require. Human greed, however, has brought us to the brink of exhausting all available supplies of food and water. The ever-expanding human population consumes vast quantities of water from the holy river Ganges, now threatening to reduce its flow. The insatiable greed of humanity may bring to an end the food culture of China, which boasts of a history of 4,000 years. The human population increases by an additional 80 million people every year and shows no sign of ceasing. We have totally lost our sense of self-control and are devouring all of the Earth's limited resources. If something is not done, our planet of water will be transformed into a planet of death in the not-so-distant future. Is the Earth waiting in silence for its end to come? Humanity has used all means available to assure its survival. The Earth, too, seeking to preserve its own life, is sending us warning signals. During the 1950s, many Asian nations, including Japan, were in a state of famine, and increasing the food supply became a national mission. Efforts began in Japan with measures to boost the production of rice, the staple food, and farmers began planting crops using newly developed high-yield varieties of rice. Those new varieties, however, required vast quantities of irrigation water, chemical fertilizers, and agricultural chemicals. Large national budgets and subsidies were used to develop agricultural land and irrigation waterways until finally, by 1961, the food self-sufficiency rate had reached 76%. Production with these new high-yield varieties using large quantities of water, agricultural chemicals, and chemical fertilizers spread throughout Asia, gradually eliminating hunger. This has been known as the Green Revolution. The major problem in India, too, following independence, was increasing the production of food. Thus, expenditures earmarked for irrigation facilities and agricultural-related activities actually accounted for 36.8% of the national budget. In China, too, shifting from the collective farms operated by people's communes, the contract system of agricultural production was introduced in the late 1970s, and a tremendous increase in the harvest was promoted through the use of large quantities of irrigation water. This shows the ratio of water used in major Asian nations by sector. The production of food is supported by large quantities of water. The Green Revolution, based on the use of large volumes of water, has made it possible for most Asian nations to achieve a food self-sufficiency rate approaching 100% based on the use of water. Food production and the self-sufficiency rate began a gradual drop beginning in about 1990. What is the reason for this? There are a number of causes. The first cause is the increase in population. The population of Asia stood at about 1,402,000,000 in the 1950s, when the Green Revolution was launched. By 1995, this had increased to 3.46 billion. That represents an increase of about 2.5 times. Food production is no longer able to keep up with the growth in population. China, in particular, has the largest population in the world. population growth continues unabated with equal vigor in spite of measures to restrain population growth that could almost be described as overly stringent. The government is also about to abandon its one-child policy. India has the second largest population. It is already greater than the entire population of Europe or Africa, and even now continues to increase at a rate of more than 2% every year. It is expected to surpass even China by mid-21st century to rank at the top of the list. The population of Asia will expand to as much as 5.9 billion by 2025. It is natural that we should see an annual decline in the self-sufficiency rate. The second cause is the shortage of water. The volume of water on Earth has changed very little over countless millions of years since antiquity. Water resources in Asia represent 36% of the total available water on Earth. In other words, 36% of the total supply of water must support 3.4 billion people, a 60% share of the total population of the Earth. Water in Asia is already reaching the limits of its ability to maintain food production at its current level. Irrigation has required the excessive intake of water from rivers and groundwater sources. A 1993 survey by the World Bank reported that there were many river valleys in Asia that did not have even a single drop of water that reached the ocean during the dry season, due to the excessive drainage of the water. There has actually been to be an average of 70 days a year during the past decade when no water flows at all in the lower reaches of the Chuan-Qian River Valley in China, a trend that still continues today. This reached 122 days, or a full one-third of the year in 1995. Once, the Ganges River had plentiful water in all seasons. Now, during the dry season in India, when irrigation is necessary, almost all rivers are dry, and large quantities of water are even drained from the great river Ganges, all along its length from the headwaters down. This shortage of water has been a great blow to agricultural crops. In India, groundwater has been excessively pumped out in more than 2/3 of the total land area of the state of Punjab, a major agricultural area, bringing about an unceasing drop in the water table. As the water table recedes, it causes the soil to harden and lose its ability to retain moisture. Once soil loses this moisture retention capability, it can never be restored again. That, in effect, will mark the end of irrigation-based agriculture. Rapid industrialization and urbanization is the third cause involved in the decline of food production. Industrialization and urbanization progressed rapidly in Japan, beginning in the 1960s, and the shift of the population from agricultural villages to urban areas proceeded with intense vigor. The current agricultural population has dropped to a mere 5.3% of the total productive population. The overall population, moreover, continues to age as food production drops further. Agricultural land has also dropped from more than 6 million hectares in the 1960s to about 5 million hectares by 1996, a loss of more than 1 million hectares. This million hectares of land corresponds to the total agricultural land surface in the Tohoku area, known as the breadbasket of Japan. The self-sufficiency rate for grain used both for human consumption and animal feed dropped from 62% in the 1960s to 29% by 1996. In other words, Japan depends on imports for 71% of its food. A halt in imports would again inevitably bring famine conditions, just as in 1945. As if following the same path as Japan, industrialization continues in East Asia, and Southeast Asia is currently in the throes of advancing industrialization. Manufacturing industries are overtaking agriculture as the GMP component. The first steps have thus been taken on the path leading towards a reduction in food production. Industrialization is also proceeding at a furious pace in China. Rich, fertile farmland surrounding large urban areas is being converted to roadways and residential and industrial sites. Agricultural land is on the decline and, furthermore, the introduction of a market economy is resulting in an expansion in the area of cultivated land for cash crops and a decrease in grain production. As many as 330 cities suffer from water shortages as industrialization and urbanization expand further. These shortages are being covered by diverting water meant to be used for irrigation from areas nearby. Agricultural water is thus being used to compensate for shortages in water supplies for industrial and household use, thereby further aggravating already insufficient supplies of agricultural water. The second five-year plan initiated in India in 1956 redirected the highest priority of public expenditures to heavy industries. The waterways and irrigation facilities developed at the time of the Green Revolution are showing signs of conspicuous deterioration. However, there has been a broad drop in investments to these irrigation facilities over the past 20 years. The fourth cause of the decline in food production is the prosperous lifestyle. A lifestyle of greater prosperity causes a shift away from a diet centered in grains to rapid growth in the demand for meat, dairy products, beer, and other products that in turn further stimulate the demand for grains. It is said, for example, that 4 to 5 kilograms of grain are required to produce a single kilogram of pork. China is currently the world's top consumer of pork. A total of 1.3 billion chickens will be needed to realize per capita consumption of 200 eggs a year, a goal that the Chinese government is seeking to achieve by the year 2000. This then will require 2 million tons of grain for use as chicken feed. It is inevitable that China, too, will eventually become a major importer of grain. Thus, the decline in food production and self-sufficiency has followed a steady course of decline since 1990, for a variety of reasons beside the increase in population, including water shortages, loss of agricultural land through industrialization and urbanization, and changes in the diet. What should our next step be? The pressing issue which we must now consider is how to make effective use of our limited supplies of available water. Unless we make some changes, the natural environment will be destroyed and, before long, the earth itself will no longer be able to support life. As much as 85% of water supplies in Asia are used for agricultural purposes in the production of food. The question that confronts us now is how to go about assuring the effective use of this agricultural water. The first answer to this question is promoting a change in our perceptions of water. Due to the importance of food production, many countries have directed large amounts of public funds and subsidies with the aim of developing agricultural water supplies. In China, the cost of agricultural water has been maintained at a very low level. As a result, Effective water use has not gone beyond a rate of about 40%. Once the perception that water is virtually free becomes generally established, considerable quantities of water will be used wastefully. Shortages of water are now being experienced everywhere. Water is not an abundant blessing from heaven, but is rather a precious natural resource that is pumped, processed, and supplied only at great cost. Using it assumes obligations that are no less essential than the benefits. That is the direction in which we must seek to change our perceptions. Perceptions of water are gradually changing in South Asia, where the people suffer from serious and chronic water shortages. For example, a groundwater market has come into existence in farming villages of Western India as if it were a natural consequence, and farmers, who until now could not dig wells, are promoting an increase in yield by purchasing irrigation water and using it effectively. In other words, a perception revolution is also taking place among these farmers. Taking California in the US as an example, the basic fee for the water required per land unit for crop production is set, and charging fees that are 2.5 times higher for any water usage in excess of this basic fee has resulted in a drop in water usage of 19% on average. The second answer is further advances in the development of irrigation water supply systems and related technology. In order to encourage the conservation of agricultural water in the countries of Asia, besides constructing new reservoirs, attempts were also launched to promote increased yields on grain crops by improving the conditions of water supply, so that crops would only receive the required amount of water and only when required. In addition, besides increasing yields per land unit by applying large volumes of irrigation water, as has been the usual practice, it is also probably necessary to consider the conditions in each area, use rainwater effectively, and expand agricultural land. It is also necessary to give thought to the introduction of new facilities and technology. It will be essential to switch from irrigation systems using waterways and sprinklers to drip irrigation that applies drops of water directly to the roots of the plant. It is known that drip irrigation can reduce the amount of water used by 30 to 60%. Although drip irrigation equipment has been beyond the reach of many farming families due to the high cost, it has recently become possible to produce the equipment easily and cheaply. Experiments using this in mountainous areas of Nepal have shown that water use can be cut in half. The third answer is the conservation and reutilization of industrial water. The volume of industrial water used in all of the countries of Asia is extremely small, amounting overall to less than 10% of total water usage in all sectors. The demand for industrial water, however, is increasing rapidly. Industrial water has already reached a level of 55% in Europe, compared to 31% for agricultural water. The use of industrial water in China is still insufficiently effective. The steel industry, for example, uses 2 or 3 times more water than the same industry in the industrialized nations, while 2 to 6 times more is used in the production of newsprint. Reutilization, too, does not go beyond about 45%. Beginning in the 1980s, however, policies were adopted to reduce both water consumption and water discharges by major companies in urban areas, and the results are steadily becoming apparent. The contamination of industrial water discharges in Japan was a serious problem during the period of intense industrial growth in the 1960s. This led to the establishment of strict water discharge standards. purification and reutilization have consequently been promoted, and the current recovery rate has reached as high as 70%. The fourth answer to the effective use of water is reassessing and changing our perceptions regarding the use of water in the home. If we go by the conventional way of thinking that water is so abundant that we can use as much as we want at any time without restraint, then there would never be enough water, regardless of how much we had. There is a need to modify the quality of the water depending on the intended use. After all, is there any reason why drinking water and sewer water should be of the same quality? Prompt steps must be taken to provide two separate water supplies. There is also an essential need for the development of equipment and facilities that would enable the realization of exhaustive water conservation for laundry, bathing, toilets, car washing, and other purposes. Furthermore, in order to avoid the pollution of household water discharges, there is also a need for a personal commitment. For example, to avoid pouring oil and other contaminants down the drain, and to stop using synthetic detergents that contaminate the environment. The only problem caused by household water discharges that contain harmful substances is not the inevitable damage to the environment, but also the huge cost of purifying that water. Water is a treasure shared by all living beings on Earth and is the source of life. Indiscriminate use of the limited supply not only threatens the production of food, but also destroys the natural ecology and will eventually lead to the extinction of all life on Earth. There is no doubt that water shortages will become more acute in the 21st century, and it is simply not possible to produce food without water. Are we likely then to welcome a bright future in the production of food? This indicates the per capita caloric intake of the major nations of Asia. The intake in China expanded from 2,000 kilocalories in 1965 to 2,683 by 1996. Korea, Malaysia, and Indonesia are at the top of the list of Asian nations with the highest intake of calories. Is there really a need for caloric intake that leads to obesity, as is so prevalent in the so-called advanced industrialized nations of the US and Europe? In spite of the fact that the food self-sufficiency rate in Japan is a mere 29%, gluttonous parties are held repeatedly every night in Tokyo. The grim truth is that the leftovers are thrown out every morning as garbage, which then become forage for crows and food for stray cats that become overweight and suffer from diabetes. Can we seriously allow practices such as this to continue? In contrast, there are still as many as 300 million people in the farming regions of South Asia who suffer from malnutrition. Food production and distribution are important issues that will require concentrated scrutiny both now and in the future. The development of new food production technology, improvements in varieties of rice and wheat that will ripen and mature with little water, the effective use of water, and the reactivation of damaged soil and abandoned farmland. These are only a part of the long list of problems that must be resolved. We must ask then just exactly what governments around the world are doing. At this time when they should be busily formulating policies and taking decisive actions to provide necessary funds to assure sufficient water and promote food production. Most of the countries are using the wealth of the people for the development and production of new weaponry and the display of military might. The 5 major countries of the world threaten us all with the force of vast arsenals of nuclear weapons and dominate the activities of the UN with veto rights that are certainly the most undemocratic practice imaginable. That is doubtless the greatest farce of the 20th century. Life on Earth depends on the ability to secure supplies of water and food. The most serious issue faced by all of the governments of the world is guaranteeing the security of food and water. Is it truly within our power, though, to realize such a guarantee? This is Mother Teresa during a visit to a poverty-stricken village. There she met a farming woman who, breathing feebly herself, cuddled an infant in her arms who had not eaten anything in days. Troubled by the sight, she quietly handed the woman her own lunchbox. Joining her hands in thanks, the woman said, "I will only eat half. You will find a person at the edge of the village who is even weaker than I. Please give the other half to that person." Mother Teresa saw in that woman, who did not know when she would meet her own death, the radiance of sympathetic affection for others and human love that surpassed the bounds of religion. There are not many resources still left to us on the earth. To ensure the survival of humanity in the future, it is important for us to foster sentiments rooted in human love of sharing together the few natural resources that still remain. All life is equal. The only way still open to humanity is the road leading to coexistence with all life and all things on earth. We must by all means avoid extinguishing the brilliance of the earth that extends back into the past for at least 4.5 billion years. Sharing and coexisting. This is the change that we must pursue in our perceptions.